Good afternoon, and welcome to CUNY NYSEB's webinar, a presentation on principles and practices of bilingual programs for elementary and middle schools. I'm going to be your host. My name is Sarah Hesson. So today you're going to be hearing from the principal, two coaches, and a teacher from PSIS 210. This is a presentation on principles and practices of bilingual programs for elementary and middle schools. You're going to hear from the principal first, Evelyn Linares. Afterwards, you'll have a Q&A. Then we'll hear from the two coaches and the teacher and another Q&A session. At the end, Ofelia García will be pulling the threads together for the conversation. So I would like to introduce now Evelyn Linares, the principal, Christina Cepero, the literacy coach, Elizabeth Silva, the math and science coach, and Isabel Lobelo, the middle school ESL teacher. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Evelyn. Hi, Evelyn.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Evelyn Linares, and I'm the principal of PSIS 210, the 21st Century Academy for Community Leadership. Our school is Spanish and English dual language school located in the Hamilton Heights section of District 6. Our mission is to provide a bilingual dual language learning experience for our students to prepare them to become lifelong learners and leaders in their community and fluent in two languages. We opened our school in the Washington Heights section of Community School District 6. Our school came about out of a need 18 years ago when we first started it for better bilingual programs. So it started as a need for bilingual education in our neighborhood. Our local CBO, the Community Association of Progressive Dominican, designed an RFP for a school of our dreams, and together with New Visions, presented it, and it became the school that we are today, PSIS 210. Our student population, we have grades pre-kindergarten to 8th grade. We have 468 students, 2% African American, 97% Hispanic. Of that 97%, 37% are emergent bilingual, also known as English language learners. Also, we have 20% of our students with special needs. Most of them are in ICT classrooms, and we have in not all of the grades, but in most of the grades. The reason I bring this part about is because even though we have students that are English language learners and students that have IEPs and are in ICT classes, if you look at the quality review snapshot, you see that in terms of improvement by student group and the state English test, compared to other students who scored at the same level last year, our English language learners do fare. Our students with special need actually do very well in terms of getting them to progress, and our lowest performance students do well also. In terms of math, I could say that our English language learners do very well. Our students with special needs do very well also. And our students in the lowest performing students do fairly. An overview of our language allocation policy is by time. And by time, I call them half days, or you could say like 3 periods. A teacher teaches basically 6 periods in a day. She has 1 lunch and 1 prep. So we have the teachers teach part of the day in English and part of the day in Spanish. This came about as a result of a visitor that came to visit us when we had our language allocation policy, where we did 3 days in Spanish and 2 days in English. And what happened was that she says, well, even though you say that you do Spanish on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, when I visit some of the classes were doing their instruction in English. So we found that even though a good part of the day was based on the language of the day, many of the teachers were not really following it the way that we wanted them to follow it, because they felt that when it came to writing, it was really hard to switch off every day from Spanish to English. So as a result of that, we designed our new program now where you have one language in the morning and the other language in the afternoon. Our language allocation policy in grades 1 through 5, what we call the literacy block, determines the length of the language cycle. For example, a personal narrative in Spanish might take 4 weeks. A personal narrative in English might take 3 weeks. Grade bands have different cycles based on different needs of students at a particular grade. Now, this didn't come about so easily. When we first thought of doing it half day, we all decided that we could do it like in cycles of 4 or 5 weeks. Little did we know that once we started doing it that way, a lot of the teachers were coming back to us telling us, we don't have enough time to finish our cycle, or we have enough time to do another one. So we realized that we had to go back to the drawing board and look carefully at the writing and figure out how much time we could spend on each of the cycles. We divided it up, and at the end of the day, it's divided up in 50-50. Now, our language allocation policy for grade 1 through 5 also, it talks about the content block, where the teachers would do most of their literacy in the morning, and then in the afternoon have the content block periods, which include math, science, and social studies. Teachers would have the chance to select how to allocate time. For example, there are some teachers that really feel that a subject like math, that they would really want to be able to teach it in English one day and in Spanish the other day. In order to do that, they have to schedule it in the day at the time that we say should be the English block or the Spanish block. So in those areas, they would be changing their schedule a little bit. But what doesn't change is the cycles. In terms of the actual teaching of the class in the language, the teacher does teach it in the language, but we leave room to have them preview vocabulary in the non-targeted language, which would be the other language. They preview the lesson objective in the non-targeted language. And at the end, or in the beginning, they could have a summary of what was being learned in the non-targeted language. It's a way of keeping the languages separate, but at the same time being mindful that the other language really does help the students when it comes to learning, and especially when it comes to learning the content. The next slide will show how our language allocation policy is. If you see on the side, there are periods 1, 2, 3, all of those are in Spanish, and then periods 4, 5, and 6. All of those would be in English. Okay. Other units switch after 2, 3, or 4 weeks, depending on the writing unit. So let's say a teacher has a prep to second period. She will still, when she comes back, she will continue in that first cycle until she does her 3 consecutive periods. In this slide, you can see how we have allocated it for first grade, the language allocation for first grade. And there, you can see how we have 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks in Spanish, and then we have following 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks in English. And the next slide shows you how to do it for second grade, and the next slide shows how grades 3 to 5 are doing it. The important thing here is that the teacher should have a copy of their calendar somewhere outside their room or on the inside of the room. So if anyone visits, they know what language is being spoken in that morning or in that afternoon. The next one is a first grade schedule, the way the teachers put it in. As you can see, this cycle, the parts that are in blue, because we also separate the language in terms of color. So anything written in blue is in English, and anything written in red is Spanish. So here you can see that the teacher has her periods in English in the morning, and then her Spanish periods in the afternoon. After a couple of weeks, then it switches over, and it's red in the morning and red in the afternoon. As for the middle school, our language allocation policy in the middle school is separated by time and by teacher. So we have English language arts and social studies, and we do it in a way in a humanities way, and those are taught in English. So we have one teacher that teaches English language arts and social studies in English. Then we have the other teacher that teaches Spanish language arts and social studies. Now, in our school, almost everyone is licensed bilingual, but we do have some teachers that don't have a bilingual license. In this case, we have a licensed music teacher who's not bilingual, and a physical education teacher that is not bilingual. So the way that we do it to keep it fair in terms of the division of the languages is that we have our art teacher who is bilingual teach her art in Spanish, and our librarian who is bilingual teach her library or do her reading, or when she speaks to the kids, doing it in Spanish. There are some classes that, because it's a lot of content and it could be very difficult, that we do in a bilingual manner. For example, in math, the teacher does, like I explained before, either a summary in the beginning or an explanation somewhere along the line, or a summary at the end in either one of the languages, the one that she feels that the students really need to understand. Most of the time they do it in English, but they are very mindful that they need to present for those students that we receive that are Spanish dominant, so that they could also learn the content and be prepared if they have to take the test in Spanish. So we do a lot of vocabulary building, explaining. We have them write, those little answers that they have to write and explain in either one of the languages. And then in science, the teacher does it by units. She does it by some units and then by the other units. In reflecting on our practice, we look at the essential elements of dual language bilingual classroom. And by using the essential elements of dual language bilingual classroom practice checklist, actually developed by Ruth Sweeney and adopted by Dr. Luisa Acosta, we look at what are some things that really should be in the classroom that are very important. For example, are the walls rich in prints in the two languages? How are they separated? Are they separated by color? Are they separated by walls? One wall is English, the other wall is Spanish. Are they separated by charts, side by side, with a visual in the middle of what's going on, of what it is that they're doing? Are the charts supportive of content process and language learning? Is there evidence of student work displayed in the two languages? Are exemplars included? Is there evidence of student work reflecting their culture and or culture of a second language? Does the teacher scaffold for students? The room and the walls reflect a point of reference, making the lesson and the language for all students to use and work independently. Now, our next slide is how we support our teachers in dual language classrooms. One thing that we do is that we provide a structure. We have study groups where they work and do planning, and they also learn strategies for English and Spanish. We also have the professional learning communities, which this year happen on Mondays, and the teachers kind of design what it is that they want to do, and they work together and they show each other, some of the things that they are good at and some of the things that they would like to learn. And it's been pretty positive, I would have to say. At this time, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I have a question here that says, what curriculum do you use for ELA and ESL? I've not seen CCSS curriculum in Spanish. Actually, when the DOE adopted the curriculum last year, we thought that we would use some of it because there are some skills that are made very easily when you have them. But in our case, we never gave up our curriculum. We used the ALL, which is Accelerated Literacy Learning. We also use lessons that are from Teachers College, from TC. And what we did was we used the skills that were provided in the different programs that were sent by the DOE, but we didn't give up our own curriculum because, well, first of all, we worked very hard on it to kind of align it to the Common Core Learning Standards and to make sure that it provided the scaffolds and the lessons that are needed for children that are learning in two languages. So I would have to say that we just continue to use the programs that we used to use, and we have our own curriculum. Why did you decide to switch language of instruction, English, Spanish, every 2 to 4 weeks? That's a good question. What happened was that I would have preferred to just do it 4 weeks and, go to the next language, but the teachers were very reflective, and as they were doing it, they realized that, it would be better if we allocated the language according to what was probably one of the hardest things for them to do in an area that we need to work on, which has to do with writing. So as far as our writing, we look at our writing units, and we divided it by writing units. But at the end, we make sure that the language was divided equally between Spanish and English? There are a lot of good questions, but that's all the time that I have right now. And at this point, I would like to, without any further ado, present to you Christina Cepero. Hi, Christina.
Hi, thank you, Evelyn. Hi, my name is Christina Cepero, and I'm the ELA instructional coach. And I work very closely with Evelyn and teachers to support students in their language and literacy development. I'm going to walk you through a language planning, how I meet with teachers and I plan around language around a specific unit of study. Also look at how teachers are entering data on a recording form, specifically around writing and identifying the traits and how to target specific instruction in English and in Spanish, and also samples of student writing in a grade, in a first and fifth grade classroom opinion and argument writing. Here is an example of how language of instruction is displayed in front of the classroom upon arrival. The teachers decorate the door very nicely, and there's a sign right next to it that says "We speak in English," and it's just like a friendly reminder for the students when they enter the classroom, just so that way they know what language they're going to be speaking when they enter the classroom. Here's an example of the schedule and how it's posted in front of the classroom, and it has student-friendly language, and again it's just a reminder for the students that way they know how the day is going to transition and from one subject to the next. And if you can see on, well, the first schedule, you have the first grade schedule, and it has visuals, and those visuals really support students in both English and Spanish, English and Spanish speaking students. And then the fifth grade schedule also has the morning block where the subject area in math, writing, and reading is taught in Spanish, and then when the students come back from lunch, instruction is taught in English for the remaining 3 periods. So here is an example of language planning that I worked with both my second grade teachers, and it was just basically getting an idea of looking at a particular unit, in this case the personal narrative unit, and looking closely at spelling, grammar, phonics, and sentence structures, and how to incorporate that in during English and Spanish instruction time. And so we pulled from different resources, Bien Dicho, Saberlo Todo, and any resources that we have and we can find, just so that way we can complement the English instruction in terms of word study during the personal narrative unit. So for example, if during word study, if teachers are teaching about adjectives, then after the 4-week cycle, the teachers will then revisit the words during word study and teach about adjetivos during that time, just so that way students are making the connection about the lessons that were taught in the previous cycle. Here is an example. Before even teaching a specific unit, administer a pre-on-demand writing in both English and Spanish. And this is the recording form that the teachers use to input the data. So in the first row is a student that we analyze his writing in the 6 traits. And in the first 2 columns is where we would input the pre-on-demand writing on a scale of 1 to 4 using the Common Core learning rubric. The first column that's highlighted in blue is the data from the English on-demand writing, and the second column is the Spanish on-demand writing, and there we also evaluate the students' writing. From that pre-on-demand writing, teachers devise specific lessons and activities to support students not only in the content area but also to support them in their language development. After several lessons, the teachers, they administer a post-on-demand writing, again in English and in Spanish, and just to see if there had been growth in that particular language and also trait. And the last column that's highlighted also in blue and red, you see it where it says published. That is a writing piece that's not on demand. However, it's a lot of support and a lot of scaffolds that's put in place. And in the next few slides, you're going to see a couple of lessons that the teachers co-created with the students to support them based on the data that you see here. Here's an example of the first grade process chart that the teacher did together with the students in the classroom. So in the first row, where it's all in blue, is the opinion and argument process chart that she did with the students. She did it together with the students, and after the 4 cycles, she then taught with using a different text but just building on the skills from the previous cycle. Here's a graphic organizer where the teacher is modeled for the students on how to structure the writing that she would like for them to do independently, and it's also in English and Spanish. And here are some visuals, and this is a read aloud that she had conducted in the classroom, focusing on the way the characters feel. And so visuals is a key component also in all the classrooms to support students' oral language. This is an example of a sample of students writing and how they were able to use the graphic organizer, which is the first picture on the upper left-hand corner, and then the students use that graphic organizer to gather their ideas and then draft and then finally publish a piece of writing. Now I'd like to introduce the math and science coach, Elizabeth Silva.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Elizabeth, and Christina just talked a little bit about specific practices that you see in our elementary school, and I'm going to focus on some practices and ways that we support emergent bilinguals in the upper grades. So in the next slide, I'm going to give you a little overview, because that's how my mind works, of what you're going to hear from me in the next couple of minutes. So the first, I'm going to give you a very specific example of how we're using translanguaging in the math classroom and highlighting how we're blending English and Spanish and how we're using strategic grouping to really support our students. And then the second very specific example I'm going to speak to you about is how do we embed culturally responsive practices in our Spanish language arts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, I think there was a question about curriculum and how do we develop that, and that's something especially in Spanish, so I'll hit on those points. What you're looking at in the next slide is, and what does translanguaging look like in our math classroom, and what are you looking at in front of you? So in front of you, you see an example of an actual sheet that the students have, and our math teachers are very technological savvy, so they use a lot of PowerPoints, and then they use a smartboard a lot. And we provide the students with both English and Spanish. Our math teachers are more comfortable speaking in English, although they do speak in Spanish, but we wanted to have a place for them to be able to really value their students' both languages, right? And how do we make sure that students are understanding the content, but also feeling that they can use both languages to understand and communicate with one another. When we plan for a language in the math classroom, we make sure that we have it in both English and Spanish. And why do we do that? In the middle school, we tend to have an influx of students who are brand new arrivals. So students that have been in the country, well, now they've been here since September, October. Actually, we got a student last week who only speaks Spanish. So we want to make sure that we're supporting their Spanish development and their content development. And you're asking me, well, if the teacher doesn't know a lot of Spanish, or if her academic Spanish isn't strong, then how are we going to give this material to them in both languages? So it is really a team effort. And what we do is the teacher begins by translating it herself or using Google Translate, and then she'll send it to me or to another colleague that feels stronger in Spanish, and we translate the material. And in a dual language world, that is what we have to do a lot of the time, like work together to translate the material, because sadly the curriculum isn't there, or we haven't found it. If anyone out there does have it, let us know. So really working together to make sure that we have the resources in both English and Spanish. The second point that I want to make is really talking about strategic and flexible groupings with our students. We do this in the math classroom, but we really do it throughout our school. And it's a practice that the students have really come to understand. And thinking about, there are times where we want to have heterogeneous groups, but there are also times that we want to have homogeneous groups. And thinking about not only planning in terms of content and ability level, but also planning in terms of where on that bilingual spectrum students are so that they can support one another and the teacher isn't just the focal point, but maybe while the teacher is giving an explanation maybe in English, because that's where she's teaching, I'm sitting with a buddy and you and I can have a conversation about that topic in Spanish and we're processing it and not saying that it's not okay to use both languages at the same time or at one time. The next part that I'm going to talk about is how we're supporting our students in the Spanish language arts classroom. So in middle school, like Evelyn spoke about, we have particular teachers that speak in a particular language. And not only do they receive English language arts instruction, but they also receive Spanish language arts instruction. And we really want to promote bilingualism, biliteracy, and biculturalism. And how do we do that? Well, through the use of culturally responsive practices and really thinking about how we get our students' culture to be evident and throughout their curriculum, not just like on certain days and certain holidays, but really infused throughout it so that they see that there's value and that, you know, it will help their academic process. So in the middle school, one of the teachers has created this project where students get to select a person from their own cultural background and they do an extensive study on them. And the pictures that you see in front of you are the selections that the students made this year. So they can be, you know, pop stars like Jennifer Lopez or literary figures like Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Isabel Allende. The students chose Isabel Allende because when I spoke to him about why he chose it, his mom is in the parent teacher book group and they just read a book by Isabel Allende, so he was really interested in learning more about her. So this is the example of what the teacher actually presented to the students, just so you have an idea. So they had to create a biography. And not only were we interested in developing their written language, but we also wanted to make sure that they developed their oral language. So the students had to create and write an actual presentation, but the biggest part of this was that they had to get in front of their classmates and present it using Spanish. And in middle school, and I think this tends to happen throughout, you know, kids tend to want to speak the English, right? And how do we build that love and that wanting and the idea that speaking Spanish is also really great? This is just the example of what that actual student wrote up. The next slide shows an example of the rubric that we use, and this rubric was used as the students were actually presenting out loud to their class, and it had content. They needed to make sure that they were supporting what they were saying about that person, but also like their speaking abilities and being able to give a presentation. So it's not only just biliteracy, being able to read and write in Spanish, but being able to express yourself in both languages. And I hope that these strategies that we're using in our school are helpful to you. And now I'm going to introduce Isabel Lobelo, who will be speaking to you about her middle school practices. So Isabel?
Thank you, Elizabeth. I will explain to you how I use Spanish in my ESL classroom, not only with the beginners, but also advanced students. It's important for the beginners, the new arrivals. It is important for my students to feel comfortable and not be afraid of expressing themselves in their mother language, especially when they're not understanding words or phrases or grasping a sound. And so I will use the Spanish to explain, for example, to say why they'll ask me, ¿cómo puede uno decir tengo 12 años y en inglés I am? Digo, porque en español usted tiene la edad, en inglés usted es la edad. And they quickly understand that. I expose my students to high-level vocabulary from the get-go. So for them to understand this academic vocabulary, I use the Spanish not only to say it, but use it writing it as well in full sentences, so they understand in Spanish what it means, and in English how it is written. I also explain to them that to understand that Spanish is not a translation of English, or that English is a translation of Spanish, that they're both different languages that happen to share some similarities. Negotiating this new culture with new food, climate, architecture, especially New York City. It helps that not to to use the Spanish because they feel less alienated. More, it embraces, if they feel more embraced into this culture. It also makes the learning less painful and less stressful. The students continue to use both languages in my classroom, and it gives me a chance, frankly, to correct their syntax when they're using Spanish as well. This is the beauty of our language, the cognates, and it's definitely easier for the teacher, to be frank. It helps them it helps them tremendously to acquire the language. As Wendy says here, that the cognates help me a lot when you spell out the word and shows how it is similar in Spanish. It helps me to understand the subject we're talking about. And usually I choose subjects that are that are interesting and challenging, not so low level, and make them, to develop critical thinking skills as well. As Ashley also states, sometimes I will try to hint it, I will mimic it, I will act it out, and I still see she doesn't get it, so I'll say the word and immediately, boom, she connects and immediately goes on into the English, even though the Spanish was introduced. And it's wonderful because even humor is very different, so I need to use the Spanish as well. Lastly, students can become resistant to learning the new language because they feel that their own language is not valued, or that it's taking over their personality. And I understand exactly what Venus says here, that she says, even though I can speak English with my friends, I feel comfortable in Spanish because I can express myself better. Plus, I like my language a lot. Some people come here and they say, I like English better. Well, I like my language. And I agree with her because I went through that experience myself when I came to this country. So with all of them, I share that experience with them, actually, and make them feel that it is like jumping into a swimming pool and coming out. You're going to come out wet, but you're going to have fun because you're going to acquire a new way of life, a new language. Now it is time for questions and answers.
I have a question here. You showed a language planning chart that you created. How teachers use it, and do they do it alone or with you? So the language planning chart, I did create it, but I did create it with the help of Dr. Luis Agarro, and we looked at different resources, and we also worked together with the teachers in identifying specific units that will complement the language and the content that's being taught for that particular unit. And the teachers, they are using it in the classroom for their planning. They find it to be very helpful, and it's a living working document. The teachers we continue looking at it and reflecting on it to see what's working and see what's not working based on instruction time. And my next question I have here is, how do you evaluate the on-demand writing? The on-demand writing, we evaluated using the Common Core Learning rubric. And during planning time, we also have the rubric in Spanish, because during the teacher's planning time, we translate the rubric also in Spanish. So the rubric that we use to evaluate the on-demand writing is the Common Core Learning rubric.
So I have a question here that actually, the two questions are very similar. So it says, how do math teachers plan to make content accessible to all students without marginalizing Spanish dominant students? And then the other question is, what home language supports do you have in place for second language learners? And I think not just our math teachers, but all of our teachers at our school really take language and content into their, that's like at the front of their minds when they are planning. And we want to make sure that we have the supports in place for them. And I think it starts with the culture of our school. We really do value both languages, and I think it's evident in our teachers and when you walk around our hallways that both languages are valued, and then we see them as an asset to helping one another. So when I say that the math teacher isn't as strong in Spanish, it doesn't mean that she doesn't love it and value it. It's just that where she is on that spectrum of the bilingualism chart is just where she is. So she might not have that academic language, but she has the support of her other teachers to help her with that academic language in Spanish. And in terms of supporting our students to make the content accessible, we make sure that we plan for language so that students have the structures of both English or Spanish highlighted, so that the evidence is we're very transparent in that, so that they know what it's expecting. We think about visuals and realia, and thinking about how to make that be infused throughout our lessons so that we can support them, because our goal is to really have students value both of their languages and use it as an asset to help them understand the content or help them interact in their world.
Someone asked me, could you share an anecdote of a student of how I've helped them acclimate to New York City? Well, I have so many of them, to be honest with you, I can't think of one. But I will tell you one thing. I do take them down to Chinatown. I bring them to Brooklyn. I take them everywhere in the city, and I show them what New York is all about. And I also acknowledge with them, yeah, some buildings are ugly. Yes, it does look ugly, and definitely the architecture in Latin America is prettier and what have you. But then I show them pretty areas in Midtown, in the Village, in any place that I can take them to outside of the city as well. And I bring in ham and cheese, for example. One time I told them ham and cheese sandwiches. One of them wanted to know, ¿qué es eso? Ham and cheese, ¿qué es eso? And so I brought it in, I grilled it, and I go, un pan tostado con queso. And that was an eye-opener for them. And there's another question, do I push in or pull out for ESL? Well, I do both. The new arrivals, I pull them out a period a day. And I do push in with two teachers, with the ELA teachers. And sometimes, to be honest, I help also in the Spanish. But when I go into the ELA teacher, I'll work with the students that are new arrivals or need help with whatever the subject matter is. And sometimes I may have to pull them out and work with them in my classroom. And that's how we do it in the school.
Hi, so I have a question from Patricia. Has Spanish writing improved with the change in language policy? We have noticed a significant progress in Spanish since our change in the language policy. Teachers are being more mindful, and in terms of building on the skills within the cycles. So looking at before this language policy, we had 3 days in Spanish and 2 days in English to help improve in the students' writing in Spanish. But now with this new language policy, teachers are teaching, giving it a fair amount of equal amount of balance in both language in English and Spanish. So, and keeping in mind the language structures and the functions and word study during our planning time to support students in their native language, in their dominant language, whether it's in English or in Spanish. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Evelyn, to Christina, to Elizabeth, and to Isabel for sharing all of your insights and your experience with us. Now I would like to introduce you to Ofelia García, a professor here at CUNY Graduate Center, who will be taking these presentations and kind of pulling the threads of the discussion together for us for the end. Hi, Ofelia.
Hello, Sarah. How are you? How are you all? And I'm really, really very pleased to be with you this afternoon after hearing this wonderful presentation and from a very, very talented principal and very, very talented teachers and coaches. One thing that emerges from what we've heard today is the fact that this school is life. You might have heard Principal Linares say that this was a school of our dreams, a dream of the community, a dream of a local CBO that wanted to start a school and decided to start a school in the community, for the community, with the community, where the students are 97% Latinos and where the school is for whoever shows up. It is not a school for the gifted, it's a school for the community. So you heard Principal Linares say that her special needs students do very well, that those that are lowest performing are doing very well. And I think that speaks a lot, because so many times I go into schools and people come up with a model. And what I think that this staff has done is they have taken a commitment to the community, a commitment to bilingualism, a commitment to valuing both languages, a commitment to valuing the cultures of the children, and at the same time adapted it so that it is not a model, it is a school for the community and for the kids. And I think that speaks volumes to what they're doing. You heard them say that they pay a lot of attention to the literacy block, and especially to writing. I think that we all know that this is a big challenge for our emergent bilinguals, and they do that well. And the other thing is that they have to be flexible. They have to be flexible because, again, because it's life. It's the life of the community. Children come in at all times, right? So that you have children. You heard Elizabeth talk a lot about the students being at all points of the continuum, of the bilingual continuum. Some speaking more English, some speaking more Spanish. And so that language has to be planned for no matter what it is that you teach, whether it's math or science or social studies or language arts. This is a very, very important. I think it's also important that this is a school that has grown. It started with the lower grades, but right now it goes all the way up to the 8th grade, so that this school, this staff has experience working with the full range. And I think, again, that's important if we're taking care of a community. I think that it was very interesting to hear how much attention they pay to the walls. We say in Spanish, que las paredes hablan. And somehow these walls were rich in print. We saw it in all the presentations. This was something that was emphasized. It was emphasized by Principal Linares that there has to be evidence of student work in the 2 languages in the walls, and that the exemplars in 2 languages is something that she looks for. We heard them say that they have study groups, that they support each other, that there are professional learning communities, that they translate stuff, that they, you heard Elizabeth say that the teachers send her work that has been translated through Google Translate, and then they each help each other. So this is something that I think works not only for the students, the community of students, the community of parents, but also for the community of teachers, and I think that's extremely important. You heard them say that they have not adopted a curriculum that has been imposed, but that what they have done is they have looked at their own curriculum. Again, it's the same formula. What is the community about? What is their curriculum that they believe in? What is it that they have? What is their vision, right? The school of their dreams. What is that they dream about, and how do they then adopt what they have dreamed about to the times, right? We are faced with new times, new assessments, and so new skills that our children have to learn. So they have taken those dreams and adapted them, but not given them up. And I think that that is so important, that they have never given that up. You heard a lot of emphasis on assessing, on making sure that you have pre and post assessments of performance, and that teachers are supported in that assessment. And there are then all kinds of scaffolds that we've seen: graphic organizers, modeling in both English and Spanish, visuals that we have been confronted with. Elizabeth talked about the use of translanguaging in math class, and the idea that this makes the content understandable for all students, and that this actually helps, again, because we're working with the whole spectrum of bilingualism. And she shared with us how students also work together in flexible groups. Strategic flexible groupings is what she called it. Sometimes heterogeneous, but sometimes homogeneous in terms of language abilities, so that they can help each other, so that you can have a buddy that with whom you consult. Sometimes heterogeneously, so that they can help each other linguistically. So the idea again is to use the classroom, use who you have in order to build better instruction. And the idea that even though literacy is important for our children, and definitely writing is a challenge that we have to address, and you heard a lot of emphasis on the writing, the oral presentations are also important, and the oral development, especially the oral development in Spanish, because they don't have enough opportunities to really present orally in formal kinds of ways, and that is something that these teachers make sure that students do. And then you heard from Isabel how she actually uses Spanish in ESL instruction. Why? And she took us through many, many reasons. Why? So that they can understand what a ham sandwich is. That's what she said. But also that because it is important for the new arrivals, it is important not only for the content, for the meeting, but also for them to understand the grammatical structures, to make sure that they acquire high-level vocabulary, because high-level vocabulary is difficult to translate, and so sometimes a word or a conversation, a dialogue in Spanish helps the student acquire this very high-level vocabulary in English, because it's less stressful, less painful, because students like their language, because it's their identity, and you can't take it away from them. You have to use it in order for them to grow these new ways of being and these new ways of speaking. Because fortunately enough, if you're dealing with English and Spanish, there are cognates that you can use. And she even said that for humor, to have fun also, because after all, what we want to make sure that our students do is have fun as we teach, instead of just suffering through exams. So I think what's really important here is that what we have is we have a school that works with the community, that grew out of a dream that the community had, of a committed groups of educators, of Evelyn Linares and many of her colleagues, but that in many, many ways they have been intelligent enough to be able to grow it by not giving up their dream, but by adapting the elements of their dream that have to change in order to adapt to the new times. So congratulations, all of you. I mean, you're doing terrific job. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah again, so that she can tell you what's next.
Thank you, Ofelia, and thank you so much for your thoughtful comments. We have a little bit of time left, so I'm actually going to turn it back over to Evelyn Linares, the principal at PSIS 210, and she has one more question that she's going to answer.
There was one more question here, and it says, could you talk about subjects that are taught bilingually? How does that work? When you think of subjects that are taught bilingually, you have to think of, in our case, it's in the middle school. We look at it by teacher, because we have one teacher that teaches the humanities in English, and we have another teacher that teaches the humanities in Spanish. Now, our school is not a big school. We have 460-something kids, and so we can't really hire a second science teacher that could do it in Spanish. So the teacher has to do it in Spanish. And what she does, in this case, I'm thinking of the science teacher, where she's fluent in both languages, licensed in not only biology, health, but also has the bilingual license. And what she does is that she chooses subjects that she decides that she's going to do in English, and she also chooses subjects that she's going to do primarily in Spanish. But all along the way, you have to keep in mind that there are students that are going to be English, not English dominant, but Spanish dominant, and so they need a lot of help when it comes time to do the presentations, especially in English. But one of the nice things about having students that can function and work in the two languages is that at any given time, one group of students are, a little bit uneasy because they're not as fluent in one language than they are in the other. But the next time, that student that's uneasy gets to experience what it is to be fluent. And this is the case that happens a lot with our Spanish dominant students, where they serve not only as a model for our English speaking students, but they also give them a reason to be able to continue to learn in the language. So at some point along the way, they get to feel really good about what they're doing. There are other teachers, like in the case of the math teacher, where her lessons mostly are given in English, but she makes sure that they learn the terminology, that they get the explanation in Spanish, because many times, even though they can take the test in either Spanish or English, they end up having trouble with the Spanish translation test because sometimes the terms are a little bit different. So that's usually a challenge. But there's a lot of ways of doing it, and those are the ways that we do it in our school. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. And thank you to all of the presenters today, as well as to Ofelia García for the discussion afterwards. So what's next? You're going to receive a follow-up email with instructions on how to receive a $50 stipend for a webinar-related task. This webinar will be archived on our webpage, so please check back periodically for updates at cuny-niceb.org. The next webinar is part 2 of the study group on Monday, April 27th from 4 to 5 p.m. This webinar is for those who attended part 1 of the series as well. If you didn't attend part 1, both sessions will be archived on our webpage a couple weeks after the webinar. Thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you again soon.